Not every crack shows up on the wall. Some begin in a person's heart. Ethan Cole, CEO of the Golden Harvest bakery chain, stared at his reflection in the mirror of a cheap hotel bathroom, the face looking back at him lined with fatigue, speckled beard, disheveled hair, and the kind of dark circles only sleepless nights could carve, barely resembled the man once featured on the cover of Fortune magazine. But that was exactly the point. Today, he wasn't Ethan, the celebrated founder who turned a single bread truck into a 37-location national empire. Today, he was Eli, an intern from headquarters assigned to the downtown Seattle store. A store with a problem. The latest reports had cost Ethan more than a few nights of sleep. Profits were down, staff turnover was up, yet product quality and customer satisfaction hadn't dipped at all. Something wasn't adding up, and none of the consultants had cracked it. Late one night, Ethan recalled something his father used to say. His father, a poor builder with dirt under his nails, but wisdom beyond books. When your house smells off, don't call in air fresheners. Go check the basement yourself. So Ethan decided to check his own basement. At 4:45 a.m., he stood in front of the Golden Harvest bakery, the kitchen lights faintly glowing through the window, and then, through the glass, he saw her. A petite woman, chestnut red hair pinned up with a plastic clip, folding dough as if each movement was a silent symphony. No one noticed, no one clapped, but Ethan stood frozen. He knew. In that moment he wasn't just chasing a revenue problem. He may have just found the heart his company had lost. The fluorescent kitchen light haloed her head like the edge of a painting in a quiet museum. Lena Hart. That was the first name Ethan heard as he stepped into the store, after a rushed greeting from Derek, the assistant manager, whose weary smile said he'd worked too long in customer service. Lena's in charge of the laminated dough, croissants, specialty breads, basically anything that keeps people coming back every morning. Derek lowered his voice, like he was sharing a legend. She gets here before I even unlock the door. Never late, never calls off, never asks for help. Ethan quietly watched Lena from a respectful distance. She didn't seem to notice the new guy, didn't flinch at the kitchen's rising noise as the rest of the crew clocked in. She stood in her own corner, marble countertop spotless, dough sheeter gleaming, every motion impossibly precise. She didn't need to look down. Her movements were memory, muscle, ritual. As Derek walked Ethan through how to stock the pastry case, make coffee, and check inventory, Ethan's eyes stayed on Lena. She was like a concerto in a room still echoing with yeast and butter, not a word wasted, not a gesture showy. Yet her croissants always the first to sell out. People didn't know her name, but they knew her scent. She bakes like her life depends on the airiness of the dough, Ethan thought. At one point, he quietly asked, "What time does she get here?" Derek shrugged. 4 earlier, maybe. I've never beaten her in. Ethan nodded, logged that away. By mid-morning, a young employee named Tyler accidentally dropped a full tray of raw dough. Ethan braced himself for a reprimand. But instead, he saw something unusual. Lena didn't scold, didn't sigh. She simply crouched down, gently said, Everyone stumbles their first time. What matters is how you pick it back up. And with flour-covered hands, she helped the boy up. Ethan felt something inside him shift, like he was waking up to something ancient and real. She wasn't working for his company. She was guarding something, maybe a memory, a promise, or a sorrow so deep it had no name. That night, back in his cold hotel room, Ethan opened his laptop and logged into the company's internal system. He typed Lena Hart. The profile came up, 34 years old. Joined the company 8 years ago. No promotions, no raise requests, no time off in the last 4 years. HR note, declined manager track. Financial detail, requested recurring salary transfer to external account. Hamilton, Financial Services. Hamilton. The name froze Ethan mid-scroll. He'd heard of that place. A predatory lender targeting small businesses on the brink, financial vultures who smelled blood in the air. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His chest tightened. Lena Hart wasn't just an excellent baker. She was battling something invisible, something that wouldn't even let her take a single day off. And he knew he had to return, not as a CEO undercover, but as a man trying to hear what had never been spoken. The next morning, Ethan arrived earlier, 4:30. Seattle hadn't woken yet, but the bakery lights shone like a lighthouse in the fog. Lena was there, of course, measuring ingredients by hand, no scale, no guesswork. Her hands calloused, burned, nails short and jagged were a record of years in silence and yeast. Ethan paused in the doorway, not wanting to break the moment, but as if she sensed his gaze, Lena turned. "Morning," she said flatly, no smile. "Are you always the first one in?" Ethan asked, tying his apron. She didn't answer immediately, just shrugged, eyes still on the dough. "I don't like to be rushed," then added, "and neither does the dough." While baking, Ethan casually brought Lena up in conversations with others, not direct questions, just breadcrumbs. Tyler, the college kid, whispered while rinsing baking trays, "Lena's different. Last Christmas, a customer left her a fat tip, like a few $100. She made us split it evenly, said, 'I just need the dough. The servers are the ones who make people smile.'" "Who does that? Mia, the cashier, shared. I once asked if she had a family. She said, 'I used to have a place I called home. Now I have a place I call kitchen.'" I didn't know what to say after that. Ethan mentally noted every word. A woman who didn't care for recognition, avoided the spotlight, as if she were hiding from fame or from a past too painful to name. That afternoon, a shipment of special flour arrived late, potentially jeopardizing the entire next day's baking schedule. The manager sighed. "This'll take 2 hours to sort, but everyone's shift is almost over." Ethan stayed quiet. He wanted to see who'd speak up. And of course, Lena stepped forward. "I'll do it. Everyone else go home." Miguel, the head baker, protested. "You opened this morning. You planning to stay until 9 p.m? It's fine. I'm used to it." And she began stacking the sacks like they were feather pillows. Ethan stayed to help. When the kitchen was nearly empty, he tried again. "Don't you ever get tired, working non-stop like this?" Lena checked a flour label, replying, "Tired? Sure. But resting, I don't have that option." It sounded like a joke, but her eyes didn't hold even a flicker of humor, only resignation. Ethan pretended to tidy up, but he was watching her, just caught a flicker of something as she glanced at her phone. Her lips pressed tight, brow furrowed, hands gripping the counter, white-knuckled. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Her shaking hands, that look in her eyes, it haunted him. He broke protocol, logged into the company's secure system, dove into Lena's financial file. What he found hit like a punch to the chest. The automatic deductions from her salary weren't for savings, not mortgage payments. They were going to Hamilton Financial Services, loan sharks in suits. He traced the trail. 7 years of payments, steady, on time. But the debt barely moved. Ethan whispered to the screen, "Who are you paying for? And why are you punishing yourself like this tomorrow?" He knew he couldn't just treat Lena as a high-performing employee anymore. She was the thread, the unanswered question, maybe even the last person guarding Golden Harvest's soul. That morning, Ethan arrived at 4:15, earlier than ever. Lena was already by the marble counter, coat dusted with flour, hair tied back same as always. "You're early," she noted, without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan admitted. "You guess I forgot how?" Her voice was soft, almost a shrug of a smile. Ethan stood quietly, then glanced at her wrist, a small tattoo peeking from her sleeve, a single flame. That tattoo, does it mean something? Lena froze. Her hands stopped kneading. "It's something I lost." She said it barely above a whisper. "Can't it be found again? Not everything lost can be rebuilt." "A bakery?" Ethan asked gently. Lena looked up, and for a second, her eyes turned to stone. "What did you just say?" "Heart and home," he whispered. "The shop you and your brother built, Jason Hart." The rolling pin slipped from Lena's hands and hit the floor with a dry clatter. "Who are you?" she asked, eyes wide, breath starting to quicken. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a printed sheet, a copy of a product proposal titled Heritage Sourdough by Jason Hart, submitted to Golden Harvest 8 years ago. "Where did you get this?" Lena whispered, her eyes flickering between shock and fear. "I found it in the archives." And Ethan met her gaze. "I'm not Eli the intern. I'm Ethan Cole, CEO of Golden Harvest." The air in the kitchen froze. Lena said nothing. She stepped back, leaning against the oven like she needed it to stay upright. Ethan slowly approached the table and placed the proposal on the familiar marble surface. "This sourdough recipe, Jason's recipe, is the foundation of our Heritage Sourdough line, one of our best sellers. But he said the company rejected it," Lena interrupted, her voice cracking. "They sent a rejection letter 2 weeks later." "Yes, because someone named Vincent Harmon, then VP of Product Development, stole it." He resubmitted the exact formula under his name and claimed it as his own. The company approved it. He got the bonus. And Jason, what did he get? Ethan's voice caught. Lena gripped the edge of the table. Jason. Jason was devastated. He believed in the dream, thought that if the product was good enough, the world would recognize it. And when it didn't, Ethan said softly, he took out a loan. Lena nodded, her hands trembling. A predatory loan. He thought if he could expand the shop, he could prove its worth. But then the fire. The insurance didn't pay out because of a licensing technicality. And a month later, Ethan didn't need to finish the sentence. Lena clenched her hands, fingernails digging into the back of her skin. He was driving late. Fell asleep. Crash. I never got the chance to tell him I forgave him. Silence took over the kitchen. Only the hum of the distant mixer and the soft glow of yellow lights remained, illuminating Lena's hands that had carried not just work, but a forgotten memory. Lena, Ethan said slowly, I can't change the past, but I can change the present. He opened his tablet. I recalculated all the revenue tied to that sourdough formula. The amount Jason and you should have received is $3.2 million. Lena didn't react. She seemed frozen. You don't have to keep paying off that debt. That loan should never have been yours. That was a failure of our system of my company. I want to make it right, Lena whispered, her eyes red. Why now? Because I can't keep sitting on the top floor pretending I don't know, Ethan said. And because I saw the way you look at the bread you make, like someone trying to hold on to another person's soul with their own two hands. Lena sat down, as if the weight of the world had been lifted only to reveal an emptiness she couldn't name. I don't know what to do next. That's okay, Ethan said, sitting across from her. This time, I'll be the apprentice, and you'll be the teacher. No one at Golden Harvest that morning had any idea the company's history was about to shift. No one expected that the man who quietly cleaned the glass, carried bags of flour, and nodded when reminded about tasks was about to challenge everything they thought defined corporate standard. Lena carried on as she always did, arriving early, kneading dough, checking humidity, baking at the precise temperature, and avoiding every spotlight. But only Ethan knew today she wasn't just a baker. She was the epicenter of a truth buried for 8 years. At 8:30 a.m., Ethan knocked on the manager's office door. Sarah, the branch manager, had just ended a call with a supplier. She looked mildly surprised to see Ethan walk in with a gaze sharper than usual. I need your help arranging an urgent meeting. All Seattle regional managers and the executive board from headquarters needs to join via video. 9 a.m. today. It's urgent. Sarah frowned. What's going on? Ethan looked her in the eye. Just tell them. CEO Ethan Cole is requesting it. The sentence cracked through the air like thunder. 9:02 a.m. The video conference began. Faces lined the large screen: the executive board, the CFO, the head of HR, legal counsel. Some faces Ethan knew well. Some he wished he didn't like: Diane Winters, chairwoman of the board, with her piercing eyes and voice always lined with suspicion. "Ethan, what's going on?" Diane began. An emergency meeting without any formal memo. Ethan stood tall, one hand resting on his laptop. Lena beside him, still in her flour-stained apron, fingers gently clasped and trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, voice steady and deep. "I just spent 6 days as an undercover intern at our Seattle flagship store. Not to monitor productivity, but to investigate why a top-performing location was seeing declining profits, constant staff turnover, and plummeting morale." Whispers rippled through the screen, and I found something far deeper than any report ever told us. He shared his screen. On it, the proposal: Jason Hart, Heritage Sourdough. This is the recipe Jason Hart, Lena's brother, submitted to Golden Harvest 8 years ago. It was officially rejected, but later used under another name: Vincent Harmon, former VP of Product Development. Board members' faces shifted. No one expected Ethan to bring up a stolen formula publicly without filters or PR buffers. This recipe has generated over $18 million in revenue from the Heritage Sourdough line in the past 7 years. Ethan continued. Meanwhile, Lena Hart, sister of the original creator, has been working 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. shifts just to pay off a debt taken to keep a dream alive. A dream this company never acknowledged. Diane cut in, her voice icy. "This is a legal matter, long past its claim window. Harmon is no longer with the company. There's no legal liability." Ethan looked directly into the camera. "This is no longer about legal liability. This is about ethics, legacy, justice." He opened his next slide. "I'm proposing 3 immediate actions. 1. Forgive Lena Hart's personal loan currently paid to Hamilton Financial. 2. Pay appropriate royalties, $3.2 million for the legacy Jason Hart left behind. 3. Appoint Lena Hart as Director of Artisan Bread Development with profit sharing and full creative authority." The air felt lead-heavy. Some shook their heads, others looked down. But Lena, still silent, finally lifted her head, her eyes clearer than ever. "She didn't ask for this," Ethan said, turning toward her. "But I'm asking for it." Lena slowly stood. Flour still dusted her sleeve, her voice calm, clear. "For 8 years, I haven't asked for a thank you. I didn't need applause. I just wanted to work in peace, to keep alive a piece of memory from the brother I loved most." She paused, took a breath. "But if this company wants to move forward with integrity, then my brother's name must be remembered not just in spreadsheets, but in every loaf I bake." A single beat of silence. Then Diane slowly spoke. "We'll need to hold a closed session." Ethan nodded. The sooner, the better. After nearly 30 tense minutes of internal deliberation, the board returned to the call. Their expressions were stern, but something had changed. Ethan felt it. Diane Winters, once the coldest dissenter, was the first to speak. "We've considered your proposal, and we unanimously agree to 3 actions." She paused. "First, Golden Harvest will erase Lena Hart's entire debt with Hamilton Financial, effective immediately." Ethan looked to Lena. She sat still, blinking, trying to process if this was real. "Second," Diane continued, "we agree to pay a settlement valued from the original sourdough recipe of $2 million. It will be placed in a memorial fund named after Jason Hart. Lena Hart will co-manage this fund." Lena turned to Ethan. Her eyes shimmered not with tears, but with something softer, a kind of dawn after a very long night. "And third," Diane lowered her voice, "we agree to create a new product line called the Hart Heritage Collection. Jason Hart will be officially credited as the creator of the foundational recipe. If Ms. Lena agrees, we'd like her to serve as creative director and also as the face of the brand." The room went completely still. Lena tilted her head, as if she'd just heard something that didn't belong in the world she knew. "Me," she whispered. Ethan spoke, his voice warm. "Lena, this is a chance for your brother to be remembered, not just in archived files, but to live on in every loaf you help create. And more than that, to pass that legacy to the next generation." A silence longer than any before followed. Then Lena spoke slowly, but with clarity. "I don't want fame. I don't need praise. I only want one thing." She turned to the screen. "Let my brother's name appear on every package, every description, every article, not as a marketing ploy, but as a late and sincere apology." Diane nodded, and for the first time that meeting, she looked like a real person, no longer just a machine of metrics and margins. "Agreed," she said. "We'll make it happen." 6 months later, outside the newly renamed flagship store, Heart and Harvest Bakery, a long line wrapped around the sidewalk. The air was thick with the scent of sourdough, warm butter, and something else, hope. A brand new bronze plaque hung beside the door, Jason Hart, the baker who rose before the dawn. Inside, beneath golden lights and gleaming display cases, Lena Hart, wearing a white coat embroidered with Hart heritage in gold thread, stood in the open kitchen, speaking to a group of reporters. "I didn't invent this recipe," she said. "I'm just the one keeping a promise to my brother. He once believed that if you made something with your whole heart, it would find the person who needed it. Today, I believe that too." Behind her were young apprentices, the first cohort of the Hart Fellowship program created by Golden Harvest. A program Lena had designed herself for skilled but under-recognized independent bakers. Ethan stood at the back of the room, quietly observing. No speech, no spotlight, just watching and finally breathing easy. Because today, everything was where it was meant to be. Not just the name on a sign, but acknowledgement, healing, and the beginning of something good. From a kitchen once tucked behind a pastry counter, Lena Hart had stepped into the light, not as a hero, not as a brand icon, just as herself, the firekeeper, the the storyteller in dough, and now, the one passing that flame to hands still trembling with youth and unfinished dreams. The Heart Fellowship officially launched that fall. Each apprentice was provided financial support, housing, and a station in the open kitchen of Heart and Harvest. They came from everywhere. Some had dropped out of culinary school because they couldn't afford tuition. Some were homeless chefs, once living at bus stops, and some had simply never believed in their own talent. Until they read the story of Lena and Jason. Lena never called herself a teacher or mentor. She simply said, "This is a place where you can fail without being discarded, where every burn mark on your bread is just a step closer to perfection." She didn't teach with PowerPoints. She taught with presence, standing beside a student who over-kneaded the dough, gently placing her hand on their wrist, whispering, "Slow down. Dough has a soul too." When Ethan visited, he often sat near the ovens. He liked watching, like each movement in that space was healing a wound in himself he never knew was there. One rainy afternoon, he saw Lena chatting with Marina, a new apprentice with shy eyes but steady hands. "I'm still scared of failing," Marina whispered. "So am I," Lena replied, "but I'm more afraid of waking up one day and no longer daring to dream." Ethan turned away, hiding a grateful smile. None of the board members that day could have imagined that giving Lena a new role wouldn't just redeem a wrong, it would revive an entire generation. And Lena herself was changing. She smiled more, wore light blue shirts instead of only grey or white, still arrived at 4:30 a.m., still inspected every tray like it was the last gift she could offer the world, but she was no longer closed off. One day, Ethan asked her, "How does it feel, having a whole team behind you now?" At first, Lena said, "It felt strange, like the fire I'd kept for years just to stay warm alone had suddenly grown big enough to warm an entire kitchen." She paused, but then I realized it's not a loss. It's multiplication. That evening, as the bakery was closing, one of the apprentices handed Lena a small loaf slightly burnt on one side, but soft and warm within. "I messed up a little, but will you try it?" Lena took a bite, closed her eyes, smiled. "Jason would have loved it," she said, her eyes far away, but no longer sad. Ethan heard her from across the room and knew a person might die, but a dream, if shared, will never fade. 3 months after Heart and Harvest launched its new product line, Ethan was invited to a board strategy meeting. It was an ordinary Monday morning, but something had changed. At the long conference table on the 18th floor, where slides and expansion plans once ruled, there now sat a small wooden plaque in the center. "This seat is for the ones who never had a voice but built the value this company stands on." Ethan had placed it there. No one objected. Diane Winters entered, glanced at the plaque. She said nothing, just sat down slowly. No more skepticism in her eyes, only quiet acknowledgement. The meeting began with regular updates. Heart Heritage had exceeded quarterly projections. The fellowship program was attracting national culinary press. Online orders had surged, and several independent bakeries had applied to affiliate with Golden Harvest. Then, during open remarks, Ethan tapped his fingers gently on the table. "I'd like to invite someone." The door opened. Lena walked in. Same flour-dusted apron, same tied-back hair, but her stride was steady, her eyes unafraid. Some board members looked surprised despite her title. None had expected a baker to speak in this room. "Thank you for giving me this chance," Lena began, voice deep and clear. "I used to think all big companies were the same, chasing numbers, ignoring people, but I was wrong. Not because you all did the right thing, but because someone in this room chose not to stay silent." She nodded to Ethan, then looked around the table. "Jason, my brother wasn't perfect. He took risks. He failed. He fell into despair. But he never stopped believing that work could be tied to dignity, not punishment." She placed a brown envelope on the table, the original handwritten sourdough recipe, neatly penned, carefully preserved. This was once labeled rejected material. But to me, it's a will. And today, I offer it to this company, not to own, but to remember. The room was silent. No typing, no glances, just depth. Diane was the first to speak, Miss Hart. "I can't undo what happened, but I promise you this from now on. Every recipe developed will bear the name of its creator, whether it's a director or a midnight baker." Ethan looked at Lena. She didn't cry, but a faint smile formed one that said, "My voice was heard." When the meeting ended, people trickled out. Lena remained, touching the plaque, "The seat for the unheard." She whispered, "Now, no one sits alone." That day, no one noticed the time except Ethan. He stood by the register, chatting with a Hart fellow. When he glanced toward the kitchen, just in time to see Lena take off her apron, fold it neatly, and place it gently on a chair like a ritual. She pulled on a soft cream sweater, her hair tied looser than usual. Her hands, once too rough for soft fabric, now moved with ease. Her face no longer looked hollow by day's end. Ethan checked his watch. 3 p.m. Lena was leaving. He walked over, kept his tone light. "Skipping out on your shift." Lena smiled, maybe for the first time without exhaustion. "No, today I chose to leave on time." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Got a date?" She nodded. "Marina, one of the fellows, invited me to the botanical garden. I said no 3 times. But this morning, while teaching her how to test dough moisture by feel, I realized I haven't touched a real flower in almost 10 years. Ethan fell silent. Lena continued, eyes glimmering with something soft. "Jason once promised he'd take me to the biggest rose garden in Seattle when our shop had enough customers. He kept saying it, but then never got the chance." She paused. "Today, I want to keep that promise for him." Ethan nodded slowly, not because he didn't understand, but because he was holding back emotion from spilling across the lines of his face. "Go," he said. "The flowers are blooming early this year." Lena stepped out of the bakery. The afternoon sun kissed her hair, forming a gentle halo. She walked down the street she'd only seen through fogged-up glass. Her steps light as if her feet were learning freedom. Later, Ethan, on a whim, passed by a corner cafe, and he stopped. Through the window, he saw Lena sitting alone at a small table. In front of her, a steaming coffee and a croissant, not one of her own. She was eating someone else's pastry from another baker, another shop, and she was smiling, truly smiling. No critiques, no corrections, no shaking of the head, just enjoying. For the first time in years, Lena Hart ate a piece of bread not to study it, but to savor it, like any ordinary person, on an ordinary day. And in that moment, Ethan knew everything they'd done, every truth exposed, every tense meeting, every document, every dollar returned was for this. So one woman could hold a piece of bread and feel peace. He stood there, hands in pockets, watching her through the soft blur of coffee steam on the window. She looked up, met his eyes. No surprise, no startle. She lifted her cup, nodded, a thank you, without needing to speak. And Ethan simply smiled and turned away, leaving her to the moment that belonged wholly to her. Because he knew nothing more needed to be said. She had earned that peace. On a winter morning, snow dusted the glass roof of Heart and Harvest Bakery. As always, Lena arrived before the first light. But today, she didn't go into the kitchen right away. Instead, she stopped in front of a small wooden cabinet near the customer counter, a space reserved for something special, the legacy box. Inside were a few of Jason's keepsakes, a weathered leather notebook filled with recipes, an old photo of the two of them standing in front of their original bakery, a wooden spoon charred on one side, and a thick envelope, an unsent letter. Lena pulled the envelope out, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. The letter inside was handwritten, Jason's slanted script showing both urgency and care. Lena, if you're reading this, then maybe things didn't go the way we hoped. I'm sorry for dragging us into this burden, for dreaming too big, for not foreseeing the risks. But if there's one thing I believe without question, it's that you're better than me, strong enough to rise, smart enough to rebuild, and kind enough not to let the world harden your heart. I don't know what you'll do next, but I hope, truly hope you keep baking. Because every time you knead dough, the world becomes just a little less cold. Lena folded the letter. No tears, but her eyes softened like snow melting on glass. That evening, Ethan walked into his office and saw a folder sitting on his desk. Beside a handwritten note, I propose founding the Heart and Harvest Academy, a place to train independent bakers across the country. I've outlined the curriculum and a rollout model in smaller cities, places like the one Jason tried to hold on to. They don't need titles, they need chances. Signed simply, Lena Hart, but with unmistakable resolve. Ethan called her. She picked up after 2 rings. Are you sure? He asked. This is bigger than a product line, bigger than a company. Her voice came through the line, steady as morning frost. Warm as a hearth, Jason wrote the recipe. I'm just adding the footnotes. Ethan smiled, gazing out the window. Outside, snow still fell, but something inside him was rising, quiet, grounded, and alive like the perfect sourdough proof. From that moment, the Heart and Harvest Academy was born. And on its opening day, Lena stood before a room of new students, young people who'd never heard of Jason Hart, but who were about to learn from his recipes, his spirit, and the sister who still folded dough with her entire heart. She said, "Here, you don't need to become someone else. Just have the courage to bring your whole self into your bread. That's how we let others feel us, even when we're no longer there." Everyone stood and applauded, not for a polished speech, but for a woman who had turned loss into a lantern for others. It was a Wednesday. Nothing remarkable. No press conference, no media blitz, no launch event. But to Lena, it was the first day she didn't plan her life around a 4 a.m. start. No dough waiting, no oven to ignite, no one requiring her presence, and nothing left she needed to outrun. For the first time in nearly a decade, she allowed herself to rest, not because she was tired, but because she had nothing left to prove. At 8 a.m., Ethan walked into the store as usual, poured himself coffee, stepped into the kitchen and saw the table where Lena always worked was empty. Her apron still hung on its hook, folded neatly, like a quiet note that read, "I'm still here, just not everywhere." He smiled and stepped out front where the Hart Fellowship apprentices were dividing pastries, testing recipes, arguing about oven temps, and laughing. In one corner, the wooden plaque that once sat in the boardroom, the seat for the unheard, had been moved. In its place now sat a real chair, with soft green fabric, facing the street through the large window. No one sat there, but everyone knew it was no longer empty. Because Lena, though absent, was present in the way the dough trays were aligned, in the way ingredients were chosen, and most of all, in the way people treated one another. That afternoon, Ethan received a photo via text. It was from Marina, one of the original apprentices, now Lena's assistant, in the picture. Lena was sitting in the park near Green Lake, wearing a chestnut-colored knit hat, holding a book and smiling. No bread, no flour, no hurry, just sunlight, fallen leaves, and a woman learning how to live an unscheduled day. Below the photo, Marina wrote, "She said it's the first time she doesn't feel in debt to time." Ethan stared at the photo for a long while, and he realized Lena's journey didn't end with a job title, a best-selling product, or financial compensation. It ended, or rather began, with a feeling she hadn't dared to dream of in years: freedom. No longer carrying the burden of repaying a debt that was never hers. No longer baking just to fill the space where Jason once stood. No longer needing the spotlight of acknowledgement because she had become the light for others. As dusk fell and the shop closed, Ethan stood alone in the kitchen, placing a hand on the marble counter where Lena once worked. He whispered, "You did it, Lena. Not just for Jason, but for everyone who's ever felt invisible." And in the air, still laced with butter, yeast, and thyme, he could almost hear a whisper light as the crack of a freshly risen loaf. Thank you for listening. One late winter morning, with snow just melted, The first spring sunlight poured through the bakery's tall windows. In the open kitchen, the oven crackled softly. Apprentices chuckled in hushed tones, and the sound of knives cutting dough created a rhythm like a gentle everyday symphony. Ethan entered, no briefcase, no blazer, just a man returning to the place where everything had shifted. At the central counter, Lena was guiding a young woman through slicing croissants. She didn't raise her voice, didn't assert authority. She simply placed her hand gently over the students and whispered, "Don't force the dough. Listen to it. Feel when it wants to bend and when it needs to rest." Ethan stood still, watching, then smiled. In that moment, he knew he hadn't just saved a person. He had helped restore a set of values long buried under image, urgency, and profit. Golden Harvest had once been a large brand. Now it was a place with a soul. The creative legacy ceremony was quiet. No cameras, no press, just Ethan, the board, bakers from every branch, and apprentices from the Hart Fellowship. They gathered around a newly unveiled plaque near the entrance. Jason Hart, the one who created the recipe, the one who passed on the flame, the one who lit the path for those unseen. Not a slogan, not a brand gimmick, a sincere apology, and a solemn promise. Lena stepped forward, wearing a long coat, holding Jason's recipe notebook, something she'd kept tucked in her drawer for years. She raised her head, voice unwavering. "I used to think justice lived only in courtrooms, but today I've learned it can also come from listening, from someone willing to kneel down, not to apologize in words, but to mend what was broken with action." She turned to the apprentices, eyes glowing. "We don't bake just to survive. We bake to repair what's been torn in families, in communities, in hearts. Never believe your hands are too small, because those same hands can fold a loaf, big enough to nourish a memory." The room fell silent. Then applause, not loud, not frenzied, but steady, deep, like a drumbeat from somewhere far away, reminding them something right had finally happened. Weeks later, Lena received an envelope in the mail. No sender name. Inside, a small card, handwritten in slanted ink. I was one of those who dismissed Jason. I sat in the meeting where his recipe was called outdated and confusing. Today, I bought the first Heart Heritage Recipe Journal. I read every formula, and I cried. Thank you for not letting his story vanish like fires no one bothers to investigate. No signature, just a small flame drawn at the bottom, identical to the tattoo on Lena's wrist. That night, with the kitchen quiet, lights dimmed, and everyone gone, Lena sat alone at the old marble counter. She wasn't working, not writing, just sitting, eyes closed, hands resting gently on the cold stone. She whispered so softly that only someone listening with their heart would hear. "I kept what you left behind, Jason. I didn't let it be forgotten." A single tear dropped onto the stone, not from pain, but from peace. At the doorway, Ethan stood watching it all. He didn't enter, just turned away, nodding slightly, knowing some things don't need to be spoken. They only need to be seen and believed.